Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jaya Virvani, and I head the Diversity and Inclusiveness Strategy for EY's Global Delivery Services. Welcome to the session this afternoon on bridging the generation gap in India. I think that today it's a very interesting discussion, moving a little away from the Gen Y hot topic of conversation. And we can't forget the fact that the Indian workplace is made up of a multi-generational workforce. And each of these generations is shaped by very different influences. Each of these influences impact working styles, impact communication preferences, and also have a potential for generational differences. In today's session, we've invited 3 corporate representatives from different generations in India to share how companies can bridge the generation gap. We're also going to highlight via the discussion why hearing perspectives of multiple generations can really lead to deeper insights and a greater diversity of thought. I'm going to invite our very first speaker and participant, Pankaj Rai, and I'm going to introduce Pankaj really quickly, though it's a really long, very robust bio that I have with me, Pankaj. Welcome to the session. Pankaj Rai is the head of strategic planning at Wells Fargo GIC, where he is responsible for creating a culture of 3 E's: effectiveness, efficiency, and experience. Pankaj has worked at Dell, leading a shared services global analytics team that consisted of over 400 members in Bangalore, supporting all the segments of Dell. In his professional career spanning over 25 years, Pankaj has worked as a management consultant at Feedback Ventures, moved into financial management consultant, into the financial services industries, whereas he's worked for ICICI and GE Capital. Pankaj has studied electrical engineering at IIT Delhi and completed his MBA from the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. While at Pankaj, is among the 12 bankers selected by the British Council Fellowship for Young Bankers Program, administered at the London School of Economics in 1999. Wow, fabulous, Pankaj, and welcome to the session.
Thank you, Jaya.
My second speaker participant is Srila Dasgupta, Associate Vice President and Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Tata Consultancy Services. Srila Dasgupta is Associate Vice President and Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Tata Consultancy Services, Business Process Services. With an MPhil in Population Studies from the Jawaharlal Nehru University, Srila has worked for over 2 decades in the developmental sector, focusing on human rights issues related to gender, social inclusion, and public health. Srila has worked both with rural poor communities as well as with international agencies, including CARE and the UN agencies, amongst others. In her role, Srila focuses on issues related primarily to gender diversity, disability inclusion, cultural cohesion, and LGBT rights at the workplace. The geographies Srila engages included a wide range from China, the Philippines, to Saudi Arabia and the USA. Srila has also had prior engagements with Nepal, Nigeria, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh. She is also strategically engaged with the United Nations, ILO, CII, NASSCOM, and of course the Tata Group HR for diversity issues at both global and national levels. Welcome again, Srila.
Hi, Jaya. Thank you so much.
My next speaker panelist is Megha Jose, IT engineer at Cisco. Megha is an IT engineer at the Cisco Systems India Private Limited and has completed her computer science and engineering degree from PSG College of Technology, graduated last year. Megha now works as part of the networking team in Cisco's IT infrastructure organization. She also leads the Early Career Network in Cisco India, which is an organization that comprises of all early in career employees with up to 5 years of work experience. Megha feels that her involvement with the ECN has helped her develop and grow as an individual in the corporate world. Megha's vision as lead of the ECN is to groom the next generation of the company to become successful leaders in the future. Welcome, Megha. So I'm going to dive into the session and talk a little bit about each of the generations that you represent. And if you could share with us, and anyone can, go take a first go at it, but if you could share with us the 3 very clear characteristics or defining bits of your generation and how that has shaped the workforce today, or how that has contributed to how shape the Indian workforce.
So, Jaya, if I can go first.
Sure.
This Pankaj here. One of the things I was reflecting when you were talking about this topic, and which came to my mind on, what really defines a generation. And, usually we tend to use age or the year and so on and so forth to typically define these generations. But I think, if you peel the onion, I think what really defines the generation is the, significant events that happened in that period, which really shaped that generation. And if you look at various periods in history, there are certain events which are far more transformational than other periods. And I somehow think that those events, let's take World War or the partition for India or some of these events, they really impact everyone very deeply. And I think therefore those generations tend to get defined in a more sort of uniform or homogeneous fashion, because everyone is impacted and everyone therefore sort of reacts in a certain way and kind of forms a certain opinion. But if some of those events are not so transformational, then I think that generation is not necessarily going to be so homogeneous, because they will see changes from different lenses and different geographies and different places and so on. So I did think that that is one realization, at least I have in my mind, that certain generations are probably more homogeneous, driven by the significant events that happened, versus some others where those events were not, or there were different events happening in different locations, and therefore those folks got shaped slightly differently, and therefore putting them in the same canvas may or may not be doing justice to that generation. So that was just a sort of a prelude to what I'm going to say, about my generation. And the reason I say that is because I do think that my generation did have a bunch of things that were quite significant, and therefore there were quite a few commonalities which defined our generation in a certain way. While when I see now, and I'm sure Megha and some others will probably contradict me or come up with their own opinions on that, may have many different things happening in different parts of the world, and therefore may not necessarily have so many commonalities, might have a lot of divergences and so on. So having said that, I think I was born on the day when Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon. So that was the year of 69, the summer of 69, so to say. And my generation really saw a few, interesting events. There was the banks got nationalized, the multinationals got thrown out of India. India was liberalized, the Manmohan Singh, Narasimha Rao regime. I think that the main, at least I think the significant thing that, happened was that, where we kind of became a more capitalistic, more private sector oriented economy versus a bit of a socialistic country that we used to be prior to that. So while, the previous generation took pride in working for the government and sort of having a stable job for life, I think my generation started to see a bit of a change where, the salaries shot up, the loyalty to the company sort of went down a bit. People started moving around, working in the private sector, going abroad and working. Some of those things started to show up, which were not, available to the other generation. So I think this globalization, I would say, was one phenomena which kind of made our generation think of the world in a slightly different fashion, and was able to also contrast that with the previous one, where some of these forces had not happened, and there was obviously a tension. When I remember when I graduated from IIT, my father and grandfather said that if you are so smart, you should do IAS versus go work in the private sector, because in their mind, that was the epitome of a great career, that you work for the government, and IAS was supposedly the best place you could be if you were working for the government. And obviously they could not comprehend why anyone would do a MBA and work for a company that they had actually not heard of, and an industry that they didn't sort of fully comprehend, which was consulting. So I would kind of pause here and sort of just leave with this few remarks that the most transformational event, I think, in our generation was this whole liberalization, globalization, which made my generation quite different from the past and created certain amounts of tension on how we viewed the world versus how they viewed the world.
Absolutely. Great points from you, Pankaj. And I think I'm going to come back to you on, how that shaped your approach to work. So I'm going to quickly, ask Srila to share her views, and then Megha, and then come back to you on just shaping the approach on work. Srila?
Yeah, thank you so much. And that was a very interesting start to having a baby boomer discussion. I always feel that maybe every generation feels that their generation is a sandwich generation. But Gen X is usually considered to be, I was born in 66, so I'm kind of borderline baby boomer and Gen X. But it's considered to be a bit of a sandwich generation between the baby boomers and Gen Y. But I really see three very distinct things which stand out for me in our generation. A is that our generation had two distinct sides to it. One is the non-conformist, activist, NGO sector blooming. So you had the feminist movement in the 70s, you had the various environmental movements starting, you had various human rights movement. In fact, Gen X is really the ones who started articulating the LGBT rights as well. So that's a huge stream. And I worked for 20 years as an activist and in the NGO sector. And then there's the other conformist stream, which I find, which was this whole, let's explore as Pankaj said, that let's explore the corporate world, let's ditch the government stability, let's move into more technology. So that was, I think, two very different streams of the same generation. So, and with different life experiences, and having now spent about almost 6 years in the corporate sector, I find a very interesting, I wouldn't say schizophrenic, but yes, a very interesting two sides of the same coin. The second point I would really say is that I think Gen X really brought in the ethos of work-life balance, the discourse of work-life balance, is because baby boomers really was their work is worship. They were complete workaholics, and I think also approaching technology helps free up time for work-life balance and families. And the third thing I would say is women started coming into non-teaching roles. So it's slightly non-traditional roles, started breaking, pushing the envelope, breaking barriers. So I think I really see these three as my generation and my life experience. I hope I answered your question.
And Srila, thanks. I'm a Gen Xer like you, and I know that Pankaj shared a very baby boomer perspective. And, everything that you said sort of resonates with me and the life experiences that I've had during the time that I was born. I'm going to just quickly, move to Megha and the whole conversation around Gen Y. Megha, it's hot. Everyone's talking about it. All the diversity practitioners and organizations are working on how do we ensure that we can keep Gen Y happy. So your perspective, please.
Yeah, I think, like you said, I think the millennials are probably the most studied and talked about generation right now. I think that's because we are the first generation in history that's, grown up totally immersed in the world of digital media. And that's completely shaped our identities. And, it's created a lasting impression in our minds, both in a political, social, and a cultural, perspective. So our biggest strength over here is definitely our comfort with social media or digital media. And I think when you talk about millennials, the most talked about thing from baby boomers and Gen Xers would be that we're very impatient with, established processes. And I think the first thing that comes to any baby boomer's mind when they hear the word millennial is like, oh yeah, they get bored very easily and their attention span is really short. But I think that me as a millennial, I think that's a wrongly perceived notion. And I would say that, us millennials, although we do have a comparatively, shorter attention span when compared to the Gen Xers and the baby boomers, I think we're very highly collaborative in nature. We have a tendency to do, extensive research before making any decision. So I think that's really, really important right now with the expanse of, the internet and all the resources that we have available to us. So with all that in play, I think we are the ones who know to use them best and come out with the best results. So yeah, so millennials, I think, are the most important generation, I would say right now, because I think in the next 20 years, we'll probably take over 70% of the workforce. So that's why satisfying us is the biggest agenda for everybody else right now.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts. And yes, being digitally native has its advantages, especially when it comes to reference points of, a Gen Xer and a baby boomer. But, just to sort of talk a little bit again about the percentages of the different generation or the different generation cohorts within your organizations. I know at EY Global Delivery Services, we're 90% millennial, 90% Gen Y. So, Pankaj, what is the composition of your organization? What are the cohorts looking like? Pankaj, I think you're on mute. Can you take yourself off mute, please?
Sorry, yeah, I was on mute. So exactly the same percentage. Yeah, in fact, I also checked before this meeting to make sure that we what our number is. So we exactly have 90% as well. And I think my age group is like less than 1%. So yeah, so I do think that the larger IT industry might have sort of similar percentages across companies, because I was talking to a few other people in other companies and they sort of returned with a similar number. So I felt it looks like an industry phenomena to me, at least.
Yeah. And, with that, what are some of the issues or challenges you're observing, working with multi-generations? What is it that you're seeing?
Yeah. So, I think, at least it appears to me that the role of a job in our life, what does it really mean in these different generations? I think for me or for my generation, job is a important part of your life, your identity. It's very difficult for people to imagine that you're out of a job. Not being in a job is some kind of a identity crisis. It's almost very personal that there must be something wrong in you if you don't have a job or if you're not working. So it was really a very critical element of your life. I think what I see happening later on nowadays is, one, I think the economy has evolved. Just like I said, the previous era was government-led jobs. My generation was private sector-led jobs. I think in this economy that sort of Megha and others represent, really the startups and the smaller companies are showing up and creating many more jobs and many more opportunities. So to some extent, when we talk about the new generation, they do seem to have more opportunities of a different type, where you can actually choose to have shorter attention spans. Because I do think that this whole talk about attention span, I actually correlate it to the investment horizons. End of the day, we are all part of a capitalist system, and the capitalist system is determined by the investors who invest in these public companies and what kind of investment horizons they have. And having been in banking, I can tell you, even the pension funds, who are supposed to be really long-term investors who are managing your retirement money, they're supposed to be thinking 30 years. Their investment span has gone down to less than a year now. It used to be they will invest in a company and hold on for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. So that has come down. That has led to activism, and the CEO span also shortening. CEOs used to sort of be in jobs for 10, 15 years. The average has now come down to 3 years. So in general, what I'm trying to argue is that the attention span of investors, of CEOs or boards, and everyone has shrunk. And if that has shrunk, and if the millennials have also shrunk that in the same line, then why are we complaining? Because it is part of the same macro trend, really. And they are really part of the same thing, in that food chain. So to my mind, they actually represent the right sort of set of ideas, because if the larger world is also going in that direction, then maybe that's what they're doing. I mean, the average startups sort of don't last for so many years, so you can't have 10-year careers in a startup and so on and so forth. So I do think that this trend, in my mind, is at least explainable, the type of investments. And I think, but when we talk about large companies like ours and maybe yours, where a lot of senior people come from the old world, who have a different idea about work and attention span and some of those things, I think they have not adjusted to this phenomena. And I at least feel that we need to recognize that the world is moving in a different direction. The investors have changed, the board's perceptions have changed, the millennials have changed. We are the ones stuck in the middle. So we need to reorientate ourselves to fit in the right way. And I don't mean that we need to start changing jobs or allowing people to change jobs, but I think we need to be more agile. And we do talk about agility in IT operations and project delivery, where we want to actually launch projects every 4 weeks. But in our mental models, I don't think we have made that shift. So I actually would sort of blame ourselves for not being agile and aware of what the trends outside are and being stuck in the past.
Absolutely agree with you. And I think looking back at, careers from what you were told could be a career versus today, a millennial is saying you can make a career out of anything that you choose, is viable, is doable, and you can make money from it or have a successful long-term career from it. I think that's the whole conversation also that is very relevant today. So going to Srila, what is the composition of your organization looking like? And how does this really influence, work values? How does it influence work styles, communication preferences?
So yeah, it's pretty much the same. Gen Y is more than 90%. Gen X is pretty much about 8 to 9%. Baby boomers is less than 1, but 1 to less than 1. And I think if I'm looking at a Gen X in my interactions with the others, I would say that I think a personal set of discourse around diversity I have found to be challenging with baby boomers, particularly around gender, because I find the discussion has to be much more, even other diversities, whether it's LGBT inclusion or disability inclusion. I feel that Gen Y is probably much more inclusive or much more open to multiple identities than baby boomers were, or even large part of Gen X is. A lesson learned from baby boomers, I would say, is the ability to put in hard work. It's incredible amount of hard work that they have given, and that work ethos. And then again, but it's also that my way or the highway is sometimes maybe not acceptable to the other current generations, particularly Gen Y. Gen Y again has, like, my personal bugbear is always what's in it for me. So I feel like we never ask questions. So, but I think what my lesson learned from Gen Y is the fact that they are very inclusive, the fact that they feel that it's one life, so let's follow our dreams. So I think that those are like my takeaways from my interactions with Gen Y. Communication, I think Gen Y is pretty much strong, even though they are succinct. And yeah, I think they're good at communication, because probably the social media just gives them that leeway to do so.
Yeah, great points from you. Thank you. I live with 2 millennials. So again, everything that you're saying.
Most of our kids are millennials. So.
Exactly. Most of the kids that you and I, and I'm sure Pankaj's kids are, also grown up. So we're all dealing with it at the moment, whether it's within the organization or at home. Megha, there's points that's come from Pankaj, from Srila on, the work styles, the differences in working with generations. What does your organization, have in terms of the composition, and what are your thoughts on some of the aspects that were shared?
So I think Cisco as an organization are a little behind when compared to others, because I think we have a little less composition of millennials when compared to a lot of other organizations. We have a lot of Gen Xers here. So I'm not exactly sure of the percentage count, so I don't want to say it out loud. But we're definitely moving in the right direction, because I know that as lead for the Early Career Network, I'm working very closely with all the senior executives in my company, and they're constantly interacting with us, through reverse mentoring sessions and boot camps and such, where it's no longer them mentoring us, it's we're mentoring them from now onwards. So all these, I've attended so many reverse mentoring sessions where we tell them that what we expect, and we tell them, we give them tips on how we work and how it's worked really well for us, and they actually adopt those practices, and they come back to us and they tell us how well it's working out for them. So we're definitely moving in the right direction. One thing that I would say is that I think we live in a culture where, people don't really confront each other much. We adopt that whole, it's, fight or flight mode where, we're really concerned about what other people might think. And that's why we don't really open up and we don't ask too many questions. And later on, when the problem starts building up, and then later on, when it's, a huge problem, we come back and we say, what, I thought about this earlier. And I just didn't want to say it out loud because I didn't know what you'd think about it. So one thing that would bridge the generation gap is definitely communication. And I think we need to be a little more open with each other, irrespective of, the age gap that's present. And this problem, I think, can be solved easily. I know every company has a hierarchy, but a lot of executives and a lot of senior management, put this hierarchy into play very seriously. So they build this wall around them where they make themselves look inaccessible in some way. So that's where we lose our whole communication, and that's where a lot of things get lost. So I think if this communication gap can be bridged, this whole generation gap can be bridged as well. So I think communication is key here.
Great points from you. Thank you. That leads into, perfectly actually leads into the next section of my question, which is really about bridging the generation gap and what organizations like yours are doing to bridge that gap, and how relevant and important it is really to start working on this so that, we can have a more inclusive workforce. So either Srila or Pankaj, any one of you can talk about what are you doing, or what is your company doing to bridge the gap?
Sure, Jaya. So I think, one of the points I want to make before answering that question was, outside the workplace, I see, two other things where these generations seem to be sort of differing, which is the political and the social consciousness. I think during the freedom struggle and all of that, there was a history of a lot of political consciousness in that generation, which I think over time kind of, went down. And I think the social consciousness around environment and many other issues was also not very well developed. But I think over time, I'm seeing that social consciousness sort of going up. The political one, I still am not sure where it is. When I see this generation, they are very, very, socially conscious, much better, much more, because maybe they have seen us destroying the environment and the waste society in many ways, and they are kind of reacting to that. But I do hope that they kind of become politically conscious as well, because, end of the day, you can't drive social change very easily if you don't also participate in, politics. But anyway, that was just as an aside outside the organizational boundary, which I thought I wanted to share. With respect to the companies, I think, and I used to work with Dell before coming here in Wells Fargo. I think most companies do have various, special interest groups or diversity forums. And, we had a, Gen Next forum over there. We have a similar sort of a forum over here. So I think people are conscious that they do need to cultivate all kinds of diversity. I think, what at least what I see is they are unable to still figure out what is the best way to make that happen. Because on gender diversity, I think it was an issue, highlighted much earlier. That forum is so much more in your face, and you can do something about it. Processes are developed. There are many, forums outside which you can go and attend. You are called for discussion. And I have to say, on this topic, this is the first forum that I'm attending or that I have been aware of, which is talking about generational diversity. Because, this is something which I have, read about or heard about, but I haven't seen being talked about as much in the industry as has been either gender diversity or LGBT or even, environment and social sustainability. So I do think that this area is there, but I suspect people don't fully comprehend or share best practices on what do we need to do. I mean, there usually are, those reverse mentoring sessions which companies do. There are a few others, but frankly, I have to say that I haven't seen robust processes or good practices in the industry, which one can say, we figured this out. There are these, 5 things that if you did, you will get there, because we do have those things in gender diversity in other areas. So this one, I at least from my standpoint, I think is still developing, and people are still, figuring out what needs to be done. And my, hypothesis on why it is the way it is, that usually some of these programs are created by the older people or the senior people. And for all the other forums, those people seem to have some context and some depth, and they know what to do. Here, I think they have no clue what to do. And they are also not delegating it to the next generation to say, okay, we don't know, you tell us what we need to do. So I suspect it is somewhere sort of lost in between, and I think more needs to be done.
Great, thanks for all those points. And just going back to your point, which I really liked around the fact that the social impact or purpose is a big thing today for the millennial, and whether it's purpose at work, purpose within society. And I think that's what's going to change India for the better, really, because that purpose and the link to life and everything that you do is really going to increase what we look at in terms of just being more conscious about the choices we make and the way we live our lives. So great points from you. Thank you. Srila, can I come to you, please? And, again, the same question to you.
So, I agree with Pankaj. I think this is a space that we're still trying to figure out. But just to reference a couple of things as we are learning on the job, all Tata Group companies are kind of based from a value point of view on the Tata Code of Conduct, and which focuses on respect for the individual, which is also reflected in the TCS core values. And that, I would say, is really central to bridging any gaps, actually. So it's not only generational, all gaps, I think that is central. And creating an environment of inclusion, a culture of inclusion, of value, which is centric to respect and inclusion. So these are things I feel which work, where the bigger framework or the bigger purpose is larger than your actual action items, which is also important. One of the things I feel is also working for us, it's not being perfected, but actually, trusting young people with leadership positions. So actually, when Rekha says that people don't listen, but I think one of the successes that I have seen happening is that actually have Gen Y as leaders in responsible positions, and it's something which works. So grooming some, putting some people in responsible positions, and of course the engagement and reverse mentoring always stays. But I will also, second Pankaj on saying we should not become benevolent despots and say that, do it our way. We should actually engage much more in participatory voice. So yeah, back to you.
Yeah, and I think that's the whole aspect about diversity and being inclusive, which is, everyone has a different opinion, everyone has a different way of doing things. How do you make sure it all works together? So I'm a huge, proponent of gender diversity, very passionate gender champion, and I'm going to use this forum here to ask you if there was one thing, that you have in terms of your perspective on how we can increase the representation of women within the workforce and leadership positions specifically. What's the tip and advice that you would give from your generational perspective?
Can I go first on this?
Sure.
So yeah, I've been working on women's rights for 25 years now. So one thing I think this is also kind of something which has been moving along the generations, and I'm glad to see movement also. But I really think we've come to a space where we really need to transition from a masculine paradigm workplace to a feminine paradigm workplace, and this is gender neutral. So it does not have to be driven by women, it doesn't have to be driven by men, but it is a bigger paradigm which needs to be understood, that you have to break gender stereotypes, that pregnancy is not a disease, that child rearing is actually, or parenting is a gender neutral job. So these are things which really I think need to start coming up. And yes, I mean, there are things like role models and everything, but I think there was a recent research we did internally also, which said that Men really don't deliberately marginalize women, but suppose they go in for their smoke breaks, those are platforms for informal exchange of information, and information is power. So if you don't have access to that information, you may not be able to get into that channel for leadership. So I think those certain old boys club barriers may have to be broken. So which is why I think a whole shift is required. And we at TCS also were the first corporate in India to sign up with UN Women for the Youth Fishing campaign. We have 19,000 champions for gender equality, males who have signed up for gender equality at the workplace. So I'm hoping that is going to be a step towards the change. I hope I've answered your questions. I could go on this for the rest of the day, but
so could I, and thank you for your views on that. I think we can have an offline conversation, you and I, and talk about this maybe over a cup of coffee. Pankaj, what do you think? What's the one tip you have?
So I have actually 4 thoughts. The last one is a tip. The first 3 are really, the trends that I see, outside. One is, education, as literacy is increasing, more and more women are sort of joining the workforce. I think the economic necessity or the economic need is also driving that phenomena where the others in the family are not stopping them and they're saying, okay, this is important and this is critical. So I think that is contributing to that. I think the third is that, as a society, the Me Too campaign or some of the issues, the way the society is reacting is also encouraging women to kind of not accept, things that are not right and sort of continue to feel that they have a right to go ahead and no one has the right to sort of suppress them. So I think those 3 things I think are, happening, and we see that, and those are really positive trends. And I think they are kind of continuing in that positive direction. The fourth one, which is a tip, I kind of rely on the example that Satya Nadella has recently set up, where he's talking about empathy, and which is related to, like Sheila said, the feminine, qualities, as the way to sort of build a more compassionate world as we go forward. The Levers, CEO Paul Mann has been talking about, triple impact to the bottom line and, social as a way forward to build a business. So I think there are some of those phenomena which are happening, and we can see that. I think even in the tech sector, which was the bastion for male dominance, we have seen, women CEOs coming in, IBM, Yahoo, and many of those companies. The banking sector, which was seen to be the bastion of men again, has had female CEOs in India. So I think a combination of those factors which are created in the industry is, also sort of, going to other companies, and people are seeing those as trends which they need to ape and follow. So I do think that, as long as companies are, looking at those trends and embracing those and putting them into their own company, I think I'm, fairly optimistic. I have 2 growing up daughters, and I think I don't tell them, but I tell others that I think the future belongs to them.
The future is female. I think I'm going to proudly say that, and I'm going to move to Megha. Megha, is this even something that crosses your mind often, saying, why are they, though the reality is there are not many women at senior leadership positions, we're all working towards it, but is that something you think about it as a millennial girl?
I actually have been a victim to this. So when I joined Cisco last year, I was the only girl in my team. So the first day in office, everybody, the first thing they told me, you know what, you're the first girl in the team. And I was like, okay, is that good or is that bad? Like, it's great to see a girl's face for once instead of, all the guys sitting here. So initially it was great. Everybody was like, treating me like a princess, and it was brilliant. And then slowly, as and when the work started getting serious, I started realizing that they have their own inner circle that I was not allowed into, whatever happened. And every time they had a discussion and I entered, they would just go all hush. And I'll be like, what happened? What are you guys talking about? And they would be like, no, it's a guy thing. And then initially it was fine. I was like, okay, whatever, you guys can talk about it. But then later on, it started affecting my work. And I actually couldn't get a lot of work done because I was not allowed into that inner circle of theirs. So how I brought down that barriers, and I actually went up and told them, what? Just because you're a guy doesn't mean you can't talk to me about these things. And I started, quoting some of situations that I've been in. And they were like, hey, wait, even I've been in those kind of situations. And then slowly they started including me in their conversations. and now I'm part of the boys club. So it's been great that way. And I think they're just not accustomed to, accepting women in certain situations. And when they see that women can be in those situations, they're completely open to it. So I think it's just this resistance to change the way they've been brought up or however it is. But I don't think they, they've not blocked out that idea. They're always open to change. They're always open to, when they see something or somebody doing something, they're like, hey, wait, we can do that as well. And they adopt it immediately. But that initial resistance to change is what's bringing a lot of problems, I think. And Cisco as a company, we have, like the Early Career Network, we have Cisco Connected Women, which is a very active employee resource organizations. They have so many events conducted and led by women, and that's really making a difference in the company. And in the 1 year that I've been in Cisco, I can see the change. I see a lot of female managers coming up. I know there are 2 more girls in my team now, so that's great as well. So yeah, so that's that.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts. And we're going to move a little bit into what questions are there for you from the listeners. And one of the questions that keep coming up from the people that are listening to us is on the whole aspect of reverse mentoring. And I know that you've been doing a lot of this, Megha. You're leading this for your organization. Would you be able to share a little bit about how reverse mentoring really works? And what are some of the strategies, if somebody is listening and wants to implement it, what are some of the strategies they can put in place?
So the Early Career Network in Cisco is an organization that's completely run by us millennials. We have no interference from any of the senior management. So it's led by us, it's run by us, all the events are done by us. So it's fully driven by us millennials. So what we do as part of the Early Career Network is we go and educate our senior management. So when we have leadership visiting from abroad, or the leadership present in Cisco Bangalore itself, we look to have sessions where we put all of them in one room, and we pick out maybe 30 ECNers, and we map them like 2-on-1, and it's just basically a 2-on-1 conversation where there are no barriers. We give them a prerequisite that whatever happens in this room stays in this room. So no one's really hesitant to talk about anything that's on their mind. And we've seen the kind of conversations that have come up in that room. It's so good. It's so transparent. And these leaders are so open to listening to all of those things, right? So we tell them anything from, the kind of hierarchy that we face to saying that we need hot chocolate in campus and coffee is not something that we drink anymore. So it ranges from that level to the most minute level. And that's really worked. And we also follow up on these reverse mentoring sessions, because a lot of times we have a bunch of leaders come, sit there in a room, listen to us, and then do nothing about it, right? So we do a follow-up session as well, where we contact these leaders and say, hey, have you guys tried implementing these things that we talked about? And then they know that, oh my God, if I don't implement this, I know an ECNer is going to be on my back next week asking me, did you do this or not? So that's something that's really worked out for us.
Glad to hear that. I think we're starting off in that journey and initiating reverse mentoring as well. But Srila and Pankaj, any programs for future leaders on how you're honing the skills to ensure that, the future generation is really working on their leadership skills and taking up more opportunities?
In our company, there's a sort of a interesting twist that, we have come up with. So we are a bank which is, largely present in the US. And, we have the India workforce. Now, the India workforce is much more millennial than the workforce in the US. So we actually had a, Asian connection, another diversity network in the US that they thought that, they could bring to India. And we said, Asians in the US are a sort of minority and they could, do something for themselves. But they were keen to bring it to India. So we kind of created a twist that we said, how about creating these reverse mentoring type of relationships, which will also allow us to bridge the gap between our, US team members who are much older in generational terms and our India team members. So we have created those types of, mentoring schemes which allow us to bridge the gap between our two teams and also bring the generational element, because what in the US, our business leaders are also finding that the future customers of the bank are going to be more and more millennials, and they don't have enough millennials inside their own workforce for them to get feedback or talk to and so on. And I think what they're also finding is that the millennials world over are far more digitally savvy and much more similar to each other beyond geographical boundaries. I mean, they all use the same WeChat, Facebook, WhatsApp, whatever. So I think that program, and it is a kind of a reverse mentoring, although we don't call it that, is working out here. But like I said earlier, that I think we are still figuring out what are the programs that we could put in place, which are meaningful. And I'm actually looking for some ideas and best practices from outside in the industry. And, right now we don't have anything meaningful, apart from the usual fun activities, CSR activities, the stuff, but a meaningful thought through program beyond the reverse mentoring, I haven't come across one yet.
Thanks, Pankaj. There's a question for us on the rise of mental health issues in the new generation, the millennials. Any thoughts on how companies can build resilience? Is anyone in any of the companies that you work for doing anything around this aspect?
Yeah, can I take that one, Jaya? Yeah, so yes, I think it's one area which all organizations need to start working on. And I'm also part of a larger mental health international congregation. And at TCS, we have these helplines, which are anonymous. We also have in-person counseling. And as a generation, I think younger people now have probably less coping mechanisms because their exposure or vulnerability to social media is much more. And maybe the shorter spans or creates limited resilience. I wouldn't say less resilience, it's limited resilience. And we really need to be alert. I don't think we worked out a way to increase resilience, but I think we have worked out a way to be alert to respond to emotional stresses and vulnerabilities. We have our HR, which is trained up on being able to identify early warning indicators. So, which is very helpful because otherwise, the HR is also very shaky about how to move, and sometimes like the HR is the first point of contact. And even the managers, we're going to train them up on identifying early warning indicators. Also, I think networks related to engagement or young people, what they love to do, whether it is engaging in a social activity like a volunteering or a CSR activity, creates resilience. My analysis is because they actually work with people who are more vulnerable than they are. And this is a best practice which I have seen both in the NGO sector and in my volunteering, young people volunteering from universities and colleges and schools, that this actually builds resilience because it creates their ability to see that, yes, you have people who are economically, socially, culturally, and like extremely marginalized. So I think that is one route to do it. But yes, it's a very important area.
Yeah, I agree. And it's some excellent points that have come from you, Sheila. Thank you. I'm going to open it out to audience, questions. All those that are listening, if there are any questions for the panelists, please feel free to type in right now. And, just to sort of, while the questions are coming in, just to close, do you think organizations are focusing enough on the fact that we need to look at all the generations or a multi-generation workforce and, do something about that versus only thinking about Gen Y? Do you think we're doing enough? Do you think there's more to be done? And if yes, what should we be doing?
I think, one of the things that, our country has not faced yet, but clearly, it will also happen is that, the proportion of the, older age generations, which have become a big phenomena in most of the other countries, is there. I think here we don't have a big problem because, largely it is the millennials, and therefore I would say there is still not so much of diversity, if I can say so. And therefore, most of the policies, most of the things are actually, should be rather shaped for the millennials, and sometimes they don't end up being that. But I think the answer, at least for our, cohort, is quite clear that since they are 90%, I mean, they should be at the center of all programs and all the other things that are designed. And we are still far from getting there, but we can get there. I think the other countries have grown where, there are much larger cohorts of various generations, and then it becomes far more difficult because, one size will not fit all. So while for us, I think it is not so critical now, but I think we need to keep looking at what's happening in those countries and how they are tackling with these, 3-4 different generations, and especially in the US, where actually in our company, we don't have a retirement age. So you could be 70 years of age and you can still work. So you do actually see a, different generation, and they have fewer millennials. They have the other, variety. So I think we can look at them because they are far more diverse, I think, than we are. We are pretty homogeneous at this point in time, but we could probably learn from them as we go forward on what else we need to keep in mind when you actually become more diverse from a generational perspective.
Absolutely, absolutely true and correct. I mean, the way the Indian workforce is moving, you're going to have a huge chunk of the population being millennial, and a reduction in the other generations over the years, not immediately, but over the years. We can already see the baby boomers, the single digit percentages of baby boomers. And that will also, at some point, that's the baby boomers are not going to be part of the workforce unless we look at doing something to actually extend the working age in India. Megha, what about you? What do you think? Are we heavily focused on only Gen Y? Should we be talking about the multi-generations in the workforce? Megha, I can't hear you. Sorry.
Sorry, I was on mute. Sorry. I think we used to be focusing a lot on Gen Y, but now the change is happening, and it's happening fast. Cisco as a company, I know that 4 years back, they weren't recruiting from colleges, but now we're recruiting I think every year about 500 college grads. So that's definitely a good change that's happening. And one more thing that needs to happen is, like Sheila said, I think we need to be given more responsibilities, and there should be more millennials as leaders. That way, when you have one millennial sitting on the board of leaders, that I know that one millennial can influence 10, baby boomers or Gen Xers to make that decision towards working for the betterment of the millennials. Because, like you said, 90% of the workforce is going to be us. So I think that's one change that needs to happen. Other than that, I think we're doing great as a country. I mean, we're moving slowly, but we're moving steadily.
That's great. Srila, just closing comments from you, and I can see that, we have one question that's come up from the audience that we can address, but I'd leave it to you to sort of close with the comment on the fact that how focused are we on including, multi-generations, and what can we do as organizations?
I'm going to talk in the Indian context, and even though there's been a lot of attention given to Gen Y, I really think that in our organization, 90% employees are Gen Y, but 90% of leadership is Gen X. So I'm in a country which is primarily culturally hierarchical in nature. Even now, and patriarchal and hierarchical. So if Gen X is sitting in positions of power, we still need to create the space to have conversations about, with, for, of, by millennials. Because I don't think we have socially moved to a democratic space where all generations have equal voice in the social space, and it gets reflected in the workplace. And I am completely in favor of having continued conversations about leadership roles going to millennials.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's it from me.
Thank you. I'm going to move to Megha. Megha, this question is for you. How can we keep millennials interested in their jobs and reduce the chances of them leaving after a couple of years? Or if they do leave, then how do we bring them back?
That's a tough one.
I know it is, and I hope I put you in the spot, but whatever you can share on your experience, it would be great.
I think there's a trend where, you work for a year or two and then you go for higher studies to get a better job. So the best thing that, a company could do to keep your millennials stay put in the company itself is to, get them interested. Because I know that a lot of companies, especially big companies like Cisco, we're so stuck onto process and we're so stuck onto routine, right? That's why we get bored. I come to every day and I come to office every day and I do the exact same thing and I go back home. There's nothing really interesting after a certain point of time. So that's why I think if we adopt the whole startup culture a little bit, that might keep millennials in their jobs longer. Where we're not, stuck to one position, where we can actually jump from, today I might be working on one particular product. Tomorrow I might be bored of that product. I should have the option to, move on to a different role. I think if that flexibility can be introduced in a company, that'll definitely keep us in the jobs longer. But the whole idea of higher education and getting a better job after is just too enticing to give up sometimes.
True, and thank you for everyone sharing so authentically their thoughts, their experiences, the reflection of each of your generations. It's been an excellent discussion, and thank you for being here with us. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.